So everybody, good afternoon, and thanks for being here. Let me go with this title that was introduced originally by Hubertus, Digitally Enabled Decarbonization, How Technology Can Be the Game Changer, that is written here. But the question is, what kind of technologies we have out there, digital technology or not digital technology, and what kind of policies can enable this technology? And I would start with Stefan, and Stefan, you work for one of the leading company in technology development, and actually you are sitting on the sustainability and technology and sustainability. So my first question or my first input for debate is how Siemens is contributing to the advancement in sustainable energy and infrastructure, and also if you can share some examples. And obviously you have also the time to introduce your company and the projects your company is working on. Just as a matter of, let's say, housekeeping, we have around, you said 1 hour and 30 minutes, 2 hours? 2 hours? 2 hours and a half? 3 hours, actually. So I give around 5-6 minutes.
17 minutes left.
Yes. But, you know, I'm from Rome, so I can take it. Don't provoke me, eh? You will die here tonight. Then I can switch with Stefan and we go on for days. Around 6 minutes for each of you, so we can make two rounds, one of 6 minutes and one of 4 minutes, and then we can have an open discussion with our audience. Floor is yours, Stefan. Thank you so much.
Yes, so thank you for the introduction. So actually already in 2015, Siemens was one of the world's first global industrial companies to announce its intention to become carbon neutral by the year 2030. And we continue to stay the course. And this is not a given necessarily. Actually, Siemens just yesterday afternoon published the results of a poll that we did among 1,400 executives globally, showing that fewer than 50% of the interviewed organizations actually expect to meet the decarbonization targets by 2030. And however, over 50% of the executives believe that decarbonization is actually a competitive advantage for their companies. And also, less than half of them believe that their country does actually have an effective decarbonization strategy. So, for the time being, decarbonization continues to be quite a challenge. So, to address this challenge, my team at Siemens Technology develops digital twins of the key elements of the energy infrastructure. So the key elements are buildings, factories, cities, and regions. And then, based on those digital twins, we apply mathematical optimization methods to come up with the most effective decarbonization roadmaps. As you said, decarbonization doesn't come from one day to the other. We should not only think in terms of what should be the ideal end state, we also need to think about the path, how to get there. And so we develop those using mathematical optimization algorithms. And so we also generate then automated control software that generates the set points for all those flexible consumers that you mentioned, for the charging stations, when to charge, for the heat pumps, when to heat, when to cool. And because a lot of the consumption has inherently some flexibility. And so our approach, and that is, I would like to stress, is actually technology agnostic, because since the spin-off of Siemens Energy, Siemens AG no longer is offering any of the technologies that I've been mentioning. No electrolyzers, no gas plants, no heat pumps. So we are really technology agnostic. But it is important for us that the design of the system overall is effective, and that then it is really operated in a very optimal way. And optimal way here means the 3 dimensions: sustainability, reliability of supply, and costs. So perhaps I can give you already 2 examples illustrating concretely what you have been mentioning, you were right to mention in your speech. So I would like to give you one example, which is how we developed a decarbonization roadmap for one of Siemens' largest factories in Amberg, southern Germany, and the Estanium initiative. So first, the decarbonization roadmap for our Amberg lead factory. So last year we developed, with a method that I've just been describing, an innovative decarbonization roadmap for that factory, so that the factory can be carbon neutral by 2030. And together with the colleagues in the plant, first we analyzed the properties of the existing buildings, of the infrastructure, of the available space, the local climate, and also what is in the surroundings, what synergies can we have with the surroundings of the plant. And that way, now we came up with a plan that is really tailored to Amberg, and that will make it carbon neutral by 2030. And we are now, based on that blueprint, developing decarbonization roadmaps for a range of Siemens's over 140 factories that we have worldwide in all kinds of climate zones. And we also start to offer this as a service to our customers. And we have been already applying it to the manufacturing industry, to the food and beverage, to the pulp and paper, and to the chemical industries. And the key learning we have from those projects actually is that a lot of the gain comes from very specific and very pragmatic measures, and nothing you can just roll out everywhere. For instance, we have a hospital in Vienna that uses the residual heat from a data center that's across the street. So the heat is decarbonized all of a sudden. And those are just specific things you can only find out if you look at the details. And then also one thing we discover is that whenever we have a close look at some energy system, we practically always find the most hair-raising, if I had some hair-raising things where, I don't know, a pump is operating against a closed valve for years or so, yeah? So you can gain 10% just by having a close look. It's a rough rule of thumb. The second example will be short. The Estanium initiative, because even if our operation or the factory's operation is carbon neutral, that does not necessarily mean that you are doing good for the environment. Because if you really want to make an impact, you also need to care for your supply chain and also for what is being done with your product afterwards, so the so-called Scope 3. And the challenge that this Estanium initiative addresses is how can the total CO2 burden be verified across the entire life cycle, across the entire value chain of a product. And there we have established an association called Estanium Association, and the members of this association, they have their respective processes, factories audited, for instance by TÜV or any other audit company, and then they provide the result of this audit in a tamper-proof way via blockchain, to a blockchain. And then such that the production processes themselves, they stay confidential. Yeah, it's like if you pass your driver license, you will just have the license showing that you passed it, but it will not say which of the questions you actually did fail during the exam, right? So, and parts of that code are even open source because we want this to spread, we want this to work. And so our next developments there are to do this not only for CO2, but also to extend it to methane, to water, to recycled content, and to offsetting measures. So, yeah, as you see, the digital technologies that change the game are actually already there, or at least some of them are there. However, legislation so far mainly imposes specific costly hardware technologies instead of incentivizing to have tailored solutions for individual situations and to then optimize them in the way I've been describing them with digital technology. Wonderful. I think I've used up the 6 minutes.
When you create terror, a climate of terror, then people are worried about exceeding the time. That's what I did successfully, but you did an excellent job. But let's keep the terror. I want to move to Jasmin because we saw these very concrete examples of technologies from one of the leading company. And Jasmin, you work for ICLEI. Maybe you can give a few words that's local governments for sustainability. So you have a great experience in working with different regions and the way they interact. And do you see any challenges or opportunity in using digital technology for decarbonizing or for decarbonization?
Yeah, thank you very much. So ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, it's an international city network working towards sustainable urban development. We have more than 2,500 local and regional governments as members all over the world. And I work for the European Secretariat. So we do projects with cities, we have events, we network, we just help them achieve their goals. And I'm very happy to be invited here today. This is not, let's say, my usual crowd, but I think it shows something that is often overlooked and neglected, which is the importance of cities when it comes to decarbonization, when it comes to technological development, sustainability in general. And it's something we always fight for, right? When you look at the Paris Agreement, when you look at the SDGs, other sustainability strategies, climate strategies, without cities, you're not going to achieve them. Like, that's a fact. And still often we're not invited to the room where the decisions are made, where policies being made, may it be the national level, the international level, or where industry leaders talk and then they want to use their technology in cities, but it's not really working because they were not included in the development, in the conversation. So happy to be here. And I think that also brings me to my point on opportunities and challenges. So there's huge potential for cities to play a part, for them to use technology to decarbonize. It's being utilized more and more, but we're far from where it should be. But without the technology, cities aren't going to achieve their goals. But there are a lot of problems, and I think one of the key problems is that administrations and governments in general, they think the two are separate. So there's decarbonization, there's sustainability, there's climate strategies, whatever cities have. Most cities do have a sustainability strategy now. And then there's a smart city strategy, digitalization strategy, whatever you want to call it. And there are two separate streams. And then maybe toward the end, it's like, okay, let's bring digital tools, let's bring technology into the sustainability strategy, and the other way around as well. But if you don't think of them from the beginning as, let's say, one unit, as one way to the solution, often it's not, A, it's not enough, and B, it's not done right. Like, you don't consult the experts from the different departments, because usually it's different departments, and then they come in and say, well, we can't do it the way you planned it, and the other way around, and often it's also too little because of that. And we're starting to see a shift, and where the management, integrated management, is being thought of as differently. And okay, sustainability, decarbonization needs to be thought of hand in hand from the get-go with the digital solutions. And I said we work on the European level. I think in the EU, we're starting to see that mind shift as well. There's the EU Green Deal. We work a lot with that. And I don't know if everyone here knows the EU missions. In our little bubble, they're everything we talk about these days. I feel like sometimes too much. But the EU missions are these 5 key priority areas by the European Commission that are part of their research program called Horizon. And one of these 5 missions is the 100 climate neutral and smart cities mission, often just called the cities mission. And here you can see, like, it's not climate neutral cities, it's not smart cities, it's one mission where they're thought of hand in hand. And I think that is so important, that we now think of them simultaneously and supporting each other. Like, don't become smart city for the sake of being smart, but to be more resilient, to be more sustainable, to be carbon neutral. I do think those are different words, by the way, and not interchangeable. But this is so important, right? We see them, and then, like, for these 100 cities, which are also the front runners in Europe, if you're curious, like, what are the best cities for digital, for using digital tools to decarbonize their economy and so on, look at these 100 cities, look at the examples that they might have. Like, they're generally the best ones and the usual suspects, I may say. But this link is so important, and that's what we also try to push. Like, when we work with cities on our projects, which are often pilot projects, right, we say, hey, don't just bring in digital solutions toward the end, but from the very beginning. And we've lots of projects in that regard. Do I have more time.
Sure, don't be, don't see it down there. Oh,
The terror. Right, and so we do work with cities on a lot of pilot projects, but then that's also the idea that, okay, these are important, and that's also what cities can do, right? They're these incubators. You can test things, you can test the technology, you can test it on a small scale, but then also we need to upscale it. Like if we want to achieve the Paris targets, we need solutions on a grand scale. And so we have these pilot projects. For example, talking of technologies and companies, we have two projects where we also work with Google. One of them, like the Google Foundation, google.org, where we test and support cities in testing like how to use the data. One of them is the Google Environmental Insights Explorer, so they provide data for the cities, and then they can see, okay, how can we use this data to make traffic flow more sustainable, to not, have these traffic jams, to be better in terms of pollution and all of this. And we help cities how they can use this data, and then they give feedback to Google how they can improve their Explorer. We have an action fund that's funded by Google, the ICLEI Action Fund, where in this current round of funding we have 7 million euros for cities where they can apply, and then they do projects where they use data, where they use technology to be more sustainable. And we need a lot more of that, but that's what we're working on, and that's what we're helping cities with. So I think there's lots of potential, but yeah, still a long way to go.
Jasmin, actually, when we spoke before this panel, we shared certain view, but now you are sort of intriguing me a question that I asked, but so you can elaborate, and it's not a surprise. You talk about the cities, but the EU has also work in, controversially, I would say, with some different reactions on the so-called green homes, the directive for the green homes. So transforming homes in green to reduce exactly, to decarbonize. How can you transfer this from cities to single households or single individuals that they have to re-qualify, restructure their homes by using the technology, for instance, Siemens is doing, or Horst was talking before. But just think about that, don't be worried. Okay, we'll come back to that. So you have some time and refreshing, you can ask AI if you want in the meanwhile. But let me come to Christian. Christian, I want to focus for a moment on Germany, since we're in Germany, and certainly Germany is somehow up front compared to other countries here in Europe. When it comes to sustainable energy and infrastructure landscape, how has evolved here in Germany, also in light of your promise of energy transition? Yeah. Should work. Is it okay? Not very much.
I take this one. That's first. Thank you. First, thanks for having me here today. Very happy to contribute to this very, very amazing discussion. I have my observation a bit from somebody who lived a long time outside from Germany. But sometimes this gives us some very good distance to what's going on here, and maybe it gives you a more neutral perspective to all these political developments which have taken place here over the last 10 years. So how I see all this evolution, I think we heard a lot about technology development from Holger Lösch at the beginning, which was very amazing to hear that we are here and using and thinking about currently about all this technology. But what I see in Germany now is that we are facing a time where the real challenges are really starting when we talk about energy transition. That actually means how we can transform our energy system to achieve our climate neutrality targets. It starts, I think, pretty easy. Not politically, but from a technical perspective and implementation technique, because all these improvements which we could see the last 10 or 15 years have been taking place in the electricity sector, where all this renewable energy could contribute a lot, and therefore we are currently have a high improvement in this sector. But the real challenges are happening now in the mobility sector and the heat sector, and this is something where we need very, very sophisticated, good technological solution, and they are not just political discussion, or not just. I think this discussion about having a nuclear phase out in Germany was very intensive and very emotional. Then there was a coal phase out discussion that was maybe a bit more emotional at the end. But now we are talking about real cost when it comes to switch our mobility understanding, how we drive, how we car, how can we use public mobility service, or when we talk about how to improve our energy efficiency in terms of the building sector. We would like to reduce the energy cost, the energy consumption from buildings, for instance. These are real costs which we have to take now in Germany, which we feel every month. Before, in the electricity sector, my feeling was in Germany, the costs have been there as well, but they have been a bit hidden in the regular monthly energy bill which you have to pay. But now they are very obvious. And all this transformation came along in a time where we face very serious geopolitical developments. So we have this war, we had a pandemic. Things getting very, very expensive now. And then we have more cost, for instance, for energy at the end of the month. Things are getting much more expensive. And the willingness, or the public willingness to spend this, also everybody, I think, agree that we need this achieve this climate neutrality targets. The question still remains who is going to pay for this. This is really something really big we need to discuss. From the infrastructure point of view, I think the challenges are still, as we have in the last years, we need to extend our electricity grids in Germany. I think a lot of things have already improved in these terms. Currently, there's a lot of discussion about how to install gas nets, how to interconnect everything in the European Union with other countries. But my feeling sometimes is all this discussion, we have a lot of discussion about strategy and targets, but the real problem is how to implement this. This is something where we have, something as Holger Lösch already taught in this initial statement, that's something where we have to improve a lot here in Germany. And I currently don't see so much good solutions here, so I think there's more space for better agreements and better solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. I think with Adoracion we have a presentation, am I right?
It's all right.
You don't?
It's just for your guidance.
Okay, wonderful. But let me start first with Holger, because I want to connect with what Christian has just said. We got it from Jasmin a more global perspective. Stefan provided a sort of technology perspective, and then Christian went more specifically into Germany. And as European, within the European Union, but it seems this is also a worldwide sentiment, we look at Germany as probably the avant-garde of the decarbonization process. I know I see your face, but that's how we perceive that. That's a good communication, or you say it's a good joke. But do you think Germany and the German industry can take a leadership, or already taking a leadership, and somehow paving the way for the rest of Europe at least?
Well, so my second job is chairman of the Industrial Affairs Committee of Business Europe. So I have a sincere European view of all of this. And I think we're missing out a lot on the chances the European community is giving us on this, especially on the energy sector. And it's for me, so last year our government announced 200 billion support for German industry. And on this day, I had a meeting of the 27 members of my Industrial Affairs Committee, and you can imagine how they looked at me. So what I want to express... So
you have this leadership. You have the leadership.
Yeah, I'm the chairman, and I'm German, the German chairman, and my government saying, we're giving 200 billion to our industry, and the other 27, the Austrians and others, looking at me, are you crazy? What is your government doing? Now, what I want to express is that Europe itself and European industries, I mean, the French, the Italians, and others have very special abilities to create a climate neutral continent, and I think we're missing out a lot on this. It's in the end always the question, who's paying for it? So I mean, other members of the European Union would like to have 200 billion for their industries, but they can't pay for it. The German government can't pay for it either, but they just announced it. But what I would say is that Europe in itself has a large chance of bringing the right technologies in cooperation. And of course, we have those regions in Europe which have very, very different abilities, like producing renewable electricity. If you look to Portugal, if you look to Spain, if you look to Greece, if you look to parts of Italy, Italy has the molecule network going into North Africa and all of this. And then we have the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, which are a huge production factory of the future for renewable electricity. And I don't think it's about having one country being in the lead. Europe, of course, has to depend on technology leaders. I mean, Siemens is one of the technology leaders in electrolysis, but we have others in Europe, and so Siemens Energy, sorry. I'm not so much into your corporate. Oh yeah, I know, of course, yeah, but Siemens Energy is one of the leaders of the PEM electrolyzer and so on. I would say that if Germany alone can achieve very little, but we can provide a lot. But in the end, I think Europe as a continent, as a European Union, has the real potential, together with some of our neighbors up to the north, Norway and others.
Thank you so much. You sort of touched from a political perspective some points that I didn't mention in the introduction to remain neutral, but maybe in the course of the debate I can go back to that. We had mainly a European perspective, also a German perspective, but we are in Germany. But certainly, as we said, there's everything also happening outside, and not necessarily in the United States. So it's great to have Adoracion here, or Adora as you like to be called. And what I like to understand is when it comes to digital initiatives in the energy sectors, how have digital technologies play a role in driving decarbonization initiatives within the Philippine energy sector? And are there specific projects or implementation you can highlight, sort of game change in this journey that the Philippines have started?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me here, and I'm glad that you tried to gain developing country insights to enrich this discussion.
From the slides you sent me, just to me now I have to share with everybody else.
Oh.
Doesn't seem you are very much developing, since you are already developed in this sense. So.
Well, in terms of policies, you may say that, but
Yeah.
When it comes to utilization of technologies, digitally enabled decarbonization, using technologies developed in advanced countries, we're not yet that advanced. No? But I would like to highlight the role of enabling policies first, because you mentioned that in your introduction. And that enables the use of what you term game-changing technologies. In the Philippines, we used to have a vertically integrated energy sector. The government operates most of the power plants and the transmission system. And then starting in 2001, we unbundled the sector, and we now have a more private sector-driven energy sector. And that's why absorption and utilization of technology is better, given also that policies are evolving. You asked for examples. There are three areas wherein digitally enabled decarbonization is happening. One is in increasing energy efficiency. Secondly is in increasing the share of renewable energy in the generation mix. And third is the decarbonization itself of industries. For increasing energy efficiency, examples include, the use of AI, software robots, to increase the efficiency, the productivity of players in the electricity sector, like the distribution utilities, the generation companies, and the transmission or the grid operator. For increasing renewable energy share in the mix, the main policies are the what are already successful in Western countries, like the use of auctions in utilizing renewable energy trading systems. We're starting to do that. And of course, you need digitalization in the setting up of the registry, and even in the trading of the renewable energy certificates themselves. Although we haven't fully commercialized that setup, but we initiated the procedure, but it's not yet fully commercial. In the decarbonization itself of industries, we have the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standards policy, and that is also being enhanced by the use of the retail electricity supply market in the Philippines. So those game-changing technologies which you pioneered in advanced countries are being absorbed and being utilized in a developing country like the Philippines through enabling policies.
Thank you, Adoracion. And since they were well designed and crafted, maybe if you want to share your slide as well afterwards to our community, that would be great. And maybe Stephen, for the next ideas to boost innovation, we might have a specific presentation on this side, as you call it, developing country that is importing these technologies. So that would be good. Since we mentioned politics, I have to turn to Barbara for certainly a progressist perspective. Obviously, it was a joke. There's a lot of politics involved, and let me start with a little comment here. I think I mentioned it earlier with Stefano as well. Europe has engaged in this gigantic Green Deal plan for the past 4 years, I would say. But surprisingly, yesterday I was listening to our next head of the Commission, as she wished she could be, and she didn't mention anything about the Green Deal almost. So it seems that the Green Deal was something of the past, and in a way is a matter of concern in the sense that maybe there was an ideological interpretation of that, but it would be wrong to put it aside and to forget that. But as I said earlier outside of the room here, we also had a commissioner that was in charge of this gigantic deal, and suddenly he thought about his home election and left the plan on the desk. And in a way, as a citizen that's following the topic, is like, is this a political sign? Is this a matter of credibility? How should voters interpret this sort of behavior? So, Barbara, here is a lot of politics and the intervention of government. So when I come to you, it's about the free market. Okay, and your law that we all share about the free market, but how do you see the role of the free market in accelerating this decarbonization, especially when it's dominated by digitalization?
Well, thank you for this wise question, because it's carrots and sticks have always worked, competition has always worked, and Europe, for example, has always been most successful when economic entities were bigger than political ones. In other words, when we were able to compete. And looking back at the European Union a couple of decades ago, we were able to liberalize in terms of liberalization, classical liberalization of, for example, the energy market, the telecom market, etc. Those things have brought us a lot of positive impetus and has brought economic growth and welfare for everybody. And I think this is something that we need to look back, especially when we look about decarbonization, net zero, smart sustainable cities, etc. And I'll give you an example. The Austrian Economic Center was involved in creating the KPIs for the United Nations. We are now running, by the way, the worldwide first United Nations national hub on smart sustainable cities. And we have created KPIs, and they were at the beginning, everybody had the idea, let's look green facades, bicycle lanes, and that's it. This was like 7, 8 years ago. And by now, we have 18 UN organizations. The most last one that joined the initiative of UN ITU was the World Tourism Organization, which means, they are truly interested in getting that smart sustainability for cities and regions going. And we created the KPIs in the way that we looked at society and culture, environment, of course, but economy as well, because eventually somebody has to pay the price for it, and somebody has to innovate and has to invent those things that what we have discussed in the morning. And so the right balance is important. So you create the carrots for the politicians, saying what Jasmin pointed out so wisely with the cities. You help them get the right tools, get the right policies done. On the other side, the industry, whether it's the BDI or the Siemens or other industry groups who provide the right products, and then mix and let them meet on the market side. And in the end, it's the consumer, of course. And then I would add, it's not the backyard in Europe. Holger, you mentioned that it's actually the front yard that people, at least in Europe, don't want to be looked into. We were just in China in July, and there privacy doesn't exist. I mean, everybody is open, and there is no data secrecy. So this is not an issue there. But on our side, especially in Europe, it is a problem, and it will take a while to overcome that issue. So when it comes to specific issues, there are market-based solutions. We published the book Green Market Revolution in 2019-2020 with C3 solutions from the US, totally market-based, and the British Conservation Group. And we are now doing the German and Italian version, hopefully soon too, with providing examples, what can be done. So you all mentioned AI and renewable energy, which helps being more efficient. Smart grids have been mentioned. Blockchain has been on our agenda. Building management systems. I mean, we can save up to 29% and more. And all those things are already in place. It just needs to be used wisely and coordinated. However, it's not top-down, it's also bottom-up. And it will take time for the citizen, for the individual, and we believe in individualism, to finally use the tools and do it voluntarily and not forced by politics, because then things, we see things ending up, as you mentioned, the commissioner leaves to his home country and the desk is left without any tasks that have been fulfilled. And by the way, I would also allow to say that people should stick to what they can do best. It's not the task of the central bank, the European Central Bank, to run green and to make decisions what is green and what is not. Their task is to create monetary stability and financial market stability, and the rest should be done by the industry, by the markets.
I know, I was expecting you were entering the European Central Bank, but that's not
I had
the topic.
to, because you mentioned the mess we are in right now, the economic mess, and
I felt it was coming.
You know me too well.
Yeah, I know. But since you mentioned the partnership, I'll go back to Jasmin, so you remember certainly the question I had asked about the green homes, and also not the partnership just with cities, but also how to engage citizens. And I'm sure in Germany you have certain landscape, but if you move in a older in the sense urban areas like Italy, Greece, Spain, but I'm sure in Austria and Germany you have similar situation, maybe not so spread. Question is how you can engage people to requalify, renovate their homes and make them carbon free. Together with the question, if you can very briefly, because we don't have much time, express a bit on collaboration and mutual learning, since you promote peer exchange and partnerships. If you have some examples or some best practice that you can share with us.
Yes, that's a lot for what you said, 4 minutes, right? And I also have some comments on what was said before. So let me start with how do you encourage people? Well, for one thing, and that's, I disagree with you a bit, Barbara. If the industry is just left to do their job, and then we trust that it becomes sustainable, I think that's tricky from our perspective, because we have a timeline, and it's we're running late, and so far that approach has not worked. So I would say we do need the legislation, as you can imagine that I'm going to say that, and it's I think it's very important that it comes from the EU level, from the national level, as well as the local level. And that also brings me back to your question. I think we do need some legislation to make that happen. So just assuming people are going to do it alone is not going to do the trick. I feel like you want to comment on that already. But we need it, and I think it should go hand in hand, because we also talk a lot about just transition with funding, especially for people who cannot afford it, right? So funding is a key instrument. And that's also something that we work on with cities, who say, well, we have funding instruments for people who cannot afford certain things. They don't apply. What do we do? And then we actually have a lot of projects on that right now, and it's difficult, because of various factors. One, you need some sort of money to begin with, and so on, right? So there's all these factors, and then we're trying to, okay, what can we do? How do you get people? What do we need to change in these funding programs? It's not easy, but I think those two need to go hand in hand. We need the legislation, we need funding programs, and that's how you get people to change their homes. But it's one of the three sectors when we talk about sustainable cities and decarbonization that are very impactful, right? Mobility, energy, and buildings. So it's instrumental, and it's important that we do that. And then I wanted to comment on the von der Leyen, Timmermans comment and so on. I think there's various reasons why she didn't press it as much, and I also was disappointed. But I also think it shows, like, we right now, we work a lot with the EU Green Deal, and I'm always like, okay, let's do that, but let's not just do that, because you have these cycles in politics, and what happens when it changes? What happens if we, as it might happen after the elections next May, we have a much more populist European Parliament, right? What's going to happen? Are we not going to have the EU Green Deal anymore? Are they going to get rid of it? So I think these are all factors to consider. In terms of networking, right? Well, we do a lot of projects with cities. So we bring different cities together in these projects for them to be able to tackle the same problem together with different but similar approaches and exchange. We are a city network, so by our nature, we bring cities together, we help them collaborate on problems, we help them exchange on problems, because if you want to do something, probably there's a city somewhere in the world, or even in Europe, that's done the same thing, and so you just need to harness that knowledge, you need to know where to find it, you need to know it exists, and that's what we're there for, right? So we help cities find out what other cities have done, we bring them together, be it a conference, be it a one-on-one call, but that's part of our job, and it's important, because without that exchange, we're not going to see the results we want to see. So bringing these cities, bringing different actors together, also civil society, industry leaders is key, and that's what we try to do.
Wonderful, Jasmin, for trying to be fast, and I know it's very hard, but thanks for that, and also for bringing together with Barbara some vibes and some differing opinions, but they are the core of how we create policies. Let's cool down the debate a bit for the moment, then we can take it again. There is also a ring outside if you want. But and Barbara is tough on this. But for the moment, let's cool down with Stefan. As a company constantly investing in innovation, is there any technology just to provide some future inputs or investments where we can look at of new products or new solution you're working on? And is there any significant collaboration that as Siemens Technology you have entered or you are considering?
Well, okay, obviously. I have to keep at least some business secrets today.
Yes,
but
I didn't mean that.
Yeah. let me give you perhaps two or three examples depending on the time I have. And those examples perhaps can also help to understand that if we let politics decide which technologies are the ones that need to be subsidized, by definition, we are years behind the technological innovation, because the technological innovation takes some time, but then to change the political subsidies for certain specific technologies additionally at several years of time, and so by definition we will always be late. So please do not decide which technologies are the right ones in a political mode. Set the framework. So 2 examples. Building automation and the smart interaction with the grid. You already mentioned the building energy management systems, Barbara. So I have an example from Vienna, actually. Because in Vienna we have a joint venture with the CityWorks, with the Vienna CityWorks, where we are field testing this smart interaction between the grid and the grid users, the buildings. So for instance, we have equipped a student residency there with more than 100 apartments with such an innovative building energy management system. And this system automatically then decides when the thermal storages are charged, discharged, when the battery will be charged, discharged, when the cars are charged or not. And a mathematical optimization algorithm continuously optimizes both for CO2 emissions and for costs. And we have taught that building energy management system to react within seconds to the request of the grid operator, of the Austrian power grid operator, to reduce or increase the building's consumption or even feedback power to the grid. And so we have proven from a technological point of view that it is already possible to have a really smart interaction symbiosis between the grid and the grid users. With such a symbiosis, we can rapidly deploy charging stations, heat pumps, rooftop PV, and all the electrification of the industry and meet the climate targets. If we don't do it, then if we don't use this smart symbiosis, it will last decades until the streets have all been dug up everywhere in the cities in order to install stronger cables. So we can buy time. We also need to strengthen the network, but we can buy time, we can be faster. So that's one element, the symbiosis. So I see no political program really fostering this type of symbiosis today. And as you might guess, one key technology that you need to do that is forecasts. So for such a forward-looking operation of our energy infrastructure, we need good forecasts. We need forecasts of the weather. We need forecasts of the electrical and thermal consumption, heating, cooling. We need forecasts of the charging, of the mobility needs, of the electricity prices, of bottlenecks in the distribution grids. And these forecasts obviously require excellent forecasting algorithms. But them were already pretty good. But the forecasts also, and you mentioned that, they are the more relevant data they have. And today we have the paradox situation, you mentioned Google, that the inverters for charging stations, for rooftop PV, for heat pumps, they all generate data. They all make their data available via the Wi-Fi, via the internet, to the original equipment manufacturers and to the operators of the house. They have that data. It's available, but the grid operators do not have access to it. So everything that's needed to have those forecasts, to have good symbiosis is there, but there is a legal blocking point, so they cannot use it. And they don't need to know for the individual house what the consumption is. It's enough if you lump together 5 or 10 houses. That's the accuracy that's needed. We don't need the individual data. And because they don't have that data, the grid operators today have to reserve unnecessarily high margins and thus require grid expansions too early or decline the right to connect your new charging station or your heat pump. And then, if I may, one last example. Yeah, okay. So to also give another concrete example, we have a collaboration. It's one of the largest publicly funded research projects where Siemens has actually the consortium lead. It's funded by the Federal Ministry of Research that we have been hearing a little bit before. It's called the Copernicus Ensure project, in the frame of which we developed the energy grid technology for the energy turnaround, for the Energiewende. So I'm the speaker of the board of that project, so I know it a little. So the ministry has been investing a total of 90 million euros already in the past 7 years in that, and we are continuing for another 3 years. So to develop this technology, it is quite an effort. So we have now developed a digital twin for the grid in real time with simulators sitting in different places in Germany, but operating totally in phase online, and that allows us to demonstrate in real time with hardware in the loop how the entire system can work with real hardware. And there, before we do the hard test with those 200 billion or whatever investments in, we can already show today how that new system can work systemically and system-wide. So concluding comment on that, we have in this project, we have the ambition, and we're actually quite confident that if we use these technologies, we can demonstrate that we can transport at least twice as much energy over our existing grid today. Yeah? We still need to expand, because if there is a place where there has been no windmill or PV plant before, then obviously you have to build a line. But there are already lines to which all the consumers are connected. And we can transport twice as much.
Great. Thanks, Stefan, also for introducing this technology and sharing this experience. I'd like to ask a few last questions to Christian and Adoracion in terms of challenges and opportunities. So what do you see in Germany and obviously in the Philippines, so two different countries, the most significant challenges in achieving a more sustainable energy infrastructure?
Well, I think in Germany we have currently just a huge implementation problem. So we have very good targets, we have strategy, maybe a bit too much strategies. Sometimes they're not really coherent. Sometimes there's a lack of coordination. So I think there's really some general coordination problem here we face in Germany to implement all this strategy. I miss often very basic economic principles. So, for instance, if you have a target, just use one instrument to keep it as simple as possible and make it cost efficient as possible. Then from the practical side, we heard about this, we are still have a lack of energy grids in Germany to bring the power where we need it. We have maybe some coordination problem with our European neighbors, which needs to be solved. And there's a big issue which came a bit, nobody really expected. This is a geopolitical environment where we live currently, which actually means energy security became extremely important again. It has been important all the time, but maybe we lived in a very easy way, maybe we took the luxury and take a bit risk, but now we have the problem. We cannot risk this anymore. We have to make sure that we have secure our energy supply all the time. And I think these are just a few examples from my side from Germany.
Thank you so much, Christian. Adoracion, particularly the energy sector, how can you leverage digital solution for accelerating this transition?
Again, the role of enabling policies come into play, and funding, of course. The Philippines is geographically challenged. It's an archipelago, and we're visited by an average of 21 typhoons. And if we are to strengthen our energy sector and decarbonize our industries through, for example, the improvement of our grid, by making it a smart grid, we have to deal first with how to make it a strong grid, how to make it a resilient grid. We are utilizing, we are trying to integrate new technologies in our path towards that smart grid journey. For example, the use of flexible AC transmission system devices. We're going to pilot test that in Zamboanga Peninsula, the southern portion of the archipelago, and the fact that the policies are friendly makes that easier to do. Funding is quite a challenge, but we can, perhaps through joint ventures with foreign investors, we can, take advantage of these technologies. We have income tax holidays for renewable energy technologies, and that's good for 7 years. And then after that, corporate income tax rate becomes 10%. So again, the role of enabling policies really come into play in taking advantage of the opportunities for decarbonization.
Thanks, Adoracion. Before you answer to Jasmin, you're not allowed now. Talking about incentives, do you see any market incentives that could work to boost this decarbonization process?
Yes, strengthening the capital markets, making sure stock exchanges work in the way they really should work, make sure regulation is limited on that front. Equity. I think this is what we definitely need in Europe most, but if we look at the Philippines, this is something where you need to create the right incentives as well, and allow innovation happening by putting price tags on things and making sure that the consumer, but also the politician, understands what the price means and the costs are. And if you don't make this transparent, we will always be left behind. And this is why I think division of labor is the most important thing, by making sure, you mentioned this, Jasmin, actually, making sure best practices are being brought up from all sides and bringing together industry, policymakers and individuals to understand how things operate. But equity, I think, is the most important thing for this thing to happen.
Thank you, Barbara. Holger, we start with you. I want to end with you, beside having some hope, and I'm sure we have. If there is any specific policy or regulatory change that you believe could accelerate this transition?
Well, first of all, politics have 3 instruments to support anything. First, they can put a price on something. Second, they can subsidize something. And third, they just can rule something, command and control. And not one of these 3 instruments is going to do the job alone. So what we really need is a sense of really how to put together these 3 instruments in the most delicate and in the most effective way. I think that's the way we have to look at it. You've seen it in Germany just recently, this terrible accident with the buildings law, where the government really made it happen that half of the people now think a heat pump is something like a dirty nuclear bomb. I mean, that's the result of trying to impose something just by command and control. And this alone is not going to work. So just perhaps to negotiate between these 2, I mean, markets alone will not achieve anything. If you have the right political set of targets, if you put together a very good framework of regulation, but then markets are going to be the most efficient ways to reach these targets. But markets alone are as bad as politicians without any strategy. And the last thing I would say, I mean, politicians, so I would quote or change the quote of my Israeli billionaire friend. He said, it's just too dangerous to let a human being drive a car. From my perspective, it's just too dangerous to let politicians decide on future technologies. And because politicians hate making mistakes, because they think their voters are going to punish them for making mistakes. And this makes them very anxious in supporting technologies. And they think they have to be absolutely sure that a company or a technology they support will succeed. But innovation is an evolutionary process. 10 people start, 8 people suffer or fail, and 2 are going to find the right thing. And this is something politicians should really take into their consideration. And over all of these crises, I would say politicians have developed a sense of having to do everything to make things just work and happen. So this started with Lehman Brothers, this went on with COVID, and I think the voters were very embracing this issue. But we all should get more certainty that we need a set of instruments, that we need a set of chances we are following, and not saying this is it and you have to do it. This is leading nowhere.
We certainly have to overcome a sort of deterministic approach to that. And I like the fact that you, since you mentioned your, now is the friend Israeli, so we understand a lot now. But you use the attribute delicate, and you know Pope Francis is referring to sustainability. Most people say it's a communist, but referring to sustainability said clearly, sustainability is a balance between, is a delicate balance between human needs and nature. So it was kind of interestingly defining the debate that we're facing. But thanks, Adoracion, Barbara, and Jasmin, and then Stefan, Christian, and Urs for being here, and Urs particularly for the keynote. Thank you so much. So a great applause for them and for the great inputs you have provided.